Uh, all right, we have some people joining. That was very quick that people jumped in this session, last session of the day. For those coming in, I'm sure you're going to be coming in while I'm speaking right now. We are going to get started with the closing keynote for day one at the Solution Summit in about 15 to 20 seconds. We just wanted to give individuals a time to jump in and get themselves situated. Hopefully everyone was able to get a little bite to eat or do what they needed to do, check up on emails, which I know is everyone's favorite thing to do. But thank you again on behalf of the entire team. I know I've said this in every session today, but we truly appreciate you being a part of the 2023 Solution Summit. We look forward to hearing feedback and connecting with more people. Feel free to find me on LinkedIn. Happy to make the connections. And at this point, I think I'm going to give this presentation over to Jami Patrick. Jami is a friend of Ian, a leader. We've done many events together. We've talked about an event similar to this one in the past. So we are very excited to have her here. She is the Vice President of Sustainability Advisory at Montrose Environmental, and she is going to be talking to us about ESG, sustainability, and climate change. Where do we start? So Jami, thank you again, and I'm going to hand it over to you. And again, people, please feel free to submit as many questions as you'd like to Jami. We will do our best to get to them before the end of her session.
Great. Thanks, Jessica. Really nice to be here today, and what a great day so far. I have really enjoyed all the sessions, and I'm really excited because there's some definite kind of key themes and threads running through all of the sessions. So I think this will be a good closeout to our day today. As you can see on the slide, the topic today, ESG, sustainability, climate change. You can enter a few other acronyms in there, GHG, CSRD. Where do we start? So for some of you, this might be a big giant step back and you might feel like you have this foundational knowledge, but I have found in a lot of conversations with my clients that sometimes we get focused in on certain parts of the sustainability journey or climate change. And for folks who this might be, you know, a relatively new issue or topic area, it's easy to get lost. And so today we are going to take that giant step back and we're going to look at what does this journey look like? I know I need to do something, but I'm not really sure where to start. If that's how you're feeling, that's kind of our message today, is to help you just get on that right path. Let's see here. Okay, so a little bit about myself. I'm Jami Patrick, as Jessica said, with Montrose Environmental. I am their Vice President of Sustainability Advisory. So I lead our team, which focuses on supporting clients on all sorts of environmental and sustainability challenges, often outside of the regulatory realm, but as others have mentioned, that regulatory realm is also changing very rapidly. My background, I've been almost a lifelong environmental and sustainability consultant with a short stint in the oil and gas industry in Abu Dhabi. I'm based in Nashville, Tennessee, and have been there for about 10 years, and just included my email address here in case anyone wants to reach out to me. I will be monitoring the kind of exhibit, the Montrose exhibit on the platform, but if after the session you need to reach out to me, please feel free to. Just a really, really quick start on who Montrose Environmental is. Many of you might know us as a stack testing company, and indeed, those were our roots. We've been in existence for about 11 years. We started as a stack testing company, quickly added laboratory services, and we've grown largely through acquisition over the last 11 years. We've been a publicly traded company for about 3 years. And you can see here, we really are a vertically integrated environmental and sustainability services business. So we do have lots of folks that are out boots on the ground, still doing stack testing, leak detection and repair, emergency response. We also have folks who are consulting with clients around environmental permitting and other compliance issues. We have an advisory team that I sit on a part of, where we're advising clients on all sorts of maybe more interdisciplinary issues. And a little bit in between, you'll see there some data platforms. We have a big focus on innovation with our biogas technology, our PFAS water treatment technology, and others. So just a little bit about our company and where I sit. And you can see here, we're largely a US company. We're growing every day, and we do have some operations in Europe and Australia as well. So let me start with a little bit of context. And like I said, I hope some of you will forgive me for really going back to the basics, but I really think it's important in order for us to have kind of a common understanding and foundation to then talk about the journey. So again, back to basics. A lot of language, a lot of acronyms. This will not be a full list, but let's start. ESG. Everyone knows what that means, right? Environmental, social, governance. But what does it really mean? So the term ESG has become almost its own word in and of itself. But really the legacy of ESG really comes from the finance sector and investors really looking and demanding for more transparency from the companies that they're investing in on their environmental and their social risks, opportunities, and impacts, and the governance mechanisms that they have in place to manage those. So I personally get a little frustrated by the term ESG because it's not a simple thing, right? It's really very multifaceted, and as we'll see today, there's a lot that sits under this term. So in the world, according to Jami, E, S, and G are really the key ingredients to a sustainable organization. So when I talk about sustainability today, I am really talking about capital S sustainability, encompassing environmental issues, social issues, whether they're kind of community and broader social issues or more internal workforce issues. And then, of course, also talking about the governance mechanisms to manage those issues and kind of some of the underlying processes and procedures and the data, as we've heard earlier today, required to measure performance. So again, ESG, key ingredients to sustainability. And, you know, in another way of saying that is, you know, sustainability is about being a resilient business that will operate in the long term. Climate change, we've heard a little bit today about climate change and GHG, greenhouse gas emissions. So we're going to talk today about sustainability and all the different issues that kind of sit under the umbrella of sustainability. Climate change is one of those issues, and one that is really becoming material for almost all organizations. So we'll talk a little bit about what climate change is, what it means, and the difference between climate risk and climate impact through greenhouse gas emissions. We'll talk a little bit later about the different types of greenhouse gas emissions. I know Mark in the previous session alluded to that already, but we'll expand on that a bit and talk about the relationship between greenhouse gas emissions and climate change and how those tie back up to sustainability. And then just for good measure, we'll throw a couple other acronyms out there. CSR, corporate social responsibility. This term is still in use. It was really kind of the precursor to sustainability, focused more on the social side. So what were companies doing to support and invest in their communities, whether that's through kind of financial measures or volunteerism. Really still part of sustainability, but you do see that acronym around a bit. So just wanted to recognize that there. And then EHS, I think we all know environmental health and safety, but I put that there because a lot of folks today who are being tasked with leading sustainability in their organizations, a lot of those come from an EHS background, and you've got that extra S tacked on, perhaps, EHS and S. So important to know that there is a lot of overlap and a lot of interplay. Companies may have an EHS function and a sustainability function. It's really important that those functions work in concert with each other. So again, just really recognizing here that that's really still part of the equation and not a separate silo on its own. Okay, so with a little bit of language and acronyms set aside, I find it really helpful to get a little bit more granular. Jami, when you're talking about sustainability or the ingredients, E, S, and G, what are you really talking about? What does that really mean? This is by no means an exhaustive list, but hopefully for those who are maybe newer on this journey, it might help you understand some of the topics and the issues that stakeholders, whether they're internal to your company or your organization or external, are expecting kind of action from you on. So again, not an exhaustive list, and you might look at these lists here and say, well, some of these aren't really important or even relevant to my organization. That's a great observation, and we're going to talk a little bit about how you kind of whittle down from the universe of E, S, and G issues and topics into those that are relevant for you through a process called a materiality assessment. So we'll get to that in a moment. And then perhaps you might be asking, well, that all makes a lot of sense, but there's no regulations around this in the US. I'm waiting to see what comes out with the SEC draft climate rule. I'm not really sure this is all that relevant to me or my organization. And I think what you'll find is that, we live in a changing world, and I'm sure most of you have heard that, all sorts of stakeholders, and this is beyond the traditional shareholder, are really demanding more action, more risk management, and maybe most painfully, more transparency and data to enable them to understand what sort of progress you're making when it comes to the most important issues in this sustainability umbrella. So some of you might be getting inquiries from investors asking around maybe certain governance items related to your board of directors, or wanting to know what your greenhouse gas emissions are. Those of you who are interviewing prospective employees are likely hearing questions from them about what your organization is doing around sustainability. Clients and customers are demanding greener products and more transparency about the impacts of products and services. And then again, as we've heard throughout the day already today, the regulatory landscape is changing, and getting ahead of that and understanding what you need to have in place in order to meet these pending regulations is really a proactive way to kickstart your sustainability program. And I guess maybe one other thing to say here as to the why should I care. I really like to think about sustainability as just a different lens through which you can look at risks, opportunities, and impacts to your organization. And by doing so, you're really helping to drive and firm up business resiliency. So it's not a tack-on, add-on thing that's kind of outside of your normal day-to-day. Integrating sustainability into your business is really about risk management, opportunities, and impact management. So today, we're going to go on a journey, and I actually have probably a few more slides than most of our presenters, because again, I feel from talking to a lot of our clients that there's a real craving for a bit of a sustainability 101, a little bit of a, how do I get started? So I I am happy to talk to anyone after the session about a little bit more detail, but I thought I would try to lay out as simply as possible kind of what a standard best practice sustainability journey looks like, so that you all can kind of identify where you are on this journey and see the path that's ahead of you. So on that, we'll talk a little bit about one of the most important steps, which is getting leadership buy-in. And then we'll talk about, as I said before, a process called a materiality assessment, which really helps you whittle down the universe of issues and topics into something that's really relevant to your organization and, importantly, to your stakeholders. We'll talk a little bit about, once you do that materiality assessment, what comes next. So establishing some governance and some accountability around those most material issues to your organization. We'll talk about, for those material issues, how do you understand what is currently in place and then define where you want to go. From there, we'll touch on target setting and goal setting. What do you put in place to meet those goals and targets, and how do you secure the resources for those? From there, with actions in place, the importance of monitoring and managing performance, and as part of that, engaging your stakeholders. And then disclosing performance to stakeholders. This in and of itself could be its own webinar. We've already talked a little bit earlier today with Mark and Christine in particular about some of the reporting frameworks. Often this tends to be a driver for a lot of company action, but you'll see that the reporting is really the output related decisions and strategies into the key processes of an organization. Jessica, I'm sorry, I might have had a speaker issue. Can you just confirm you can still hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. It did go out for just a second, but we are good to go now. Gotta love technology, especially with live events.
Great. Well, okay. I think it was my headphones that had an issue, so I'll move forward here. So, okay, the sustainability journey. Those points that we talked about, I'm just going to give you a little flavor on what each of those steps look like. Again, many of you might have already taken some of these steps and not others. I suspect others of you on the call are really wondering where to start. So I hope that this provides a clear path. So, as I mentioned, one of the key places to start is to get leadership buy-in for your sustainability effort. So it's really essential to secure resources and to pave the way for the organization that this buy-in really comes from the top. And maybe at its simplest, when folks know that the CEO is supportive and that the sustainability journey is really being led from the top, that really helps to motivate action. And again, just pave the way for a successful sustainability program. In order to get that leadership and buy-in, it may, depending on your organization and kind of the current sentiment of your executive leadership team or your board of directors, it may be required to make a bit of a business case for acting on sustainability. And that, again, it's really, there's not a one size fits all for making that business case. Really depends on the culture of your organization. Sometimes it can be helpful to make the business case just for the first step, a materiality assessment, which we'll talk about next. Other times you might want to go in and make the business case for the broader program. Things to consider when you're talking to executive leadership and the board of directors to get their buy-in. It'd be good to go in with a good understanding of, what are your investors? If you have investors, what are they asking about? What are customers demanding?
I think in an earlier session, we talked about what are your peers doing and communicating. Also maybe understanding what risks are on the horizon that your company needs to prepare for. So kind of doing a little bit of legwork to pull together a business case to make sure that you're getting that support and buy-in from the top of the organization. So with that in hand, whether that's for a broad sustainability commitment or just for the first step, we find that it's really most beneficial for organizations to start with a materiality assessment. And this may be a process or a phrase that you are or are not familiar with, but as I said before, depending on the type of company, sustainability can mean so many different things. And those issues that fall under the E, the S, and the G, they vary. They're not the same for an oil and gas company as they are for an advisory and a consulting company, or for a manufacturer, or for a financial institution. So conducting a materiality assessment is really the best way to understand which of these specific issues are most important to your internal stakeholders and your external stakeholders. And so that will allow you to focus your resources, your efforts, and your programs around those issues that matter most. Again, this is a topic that could probably, have a deep dive of its own, but maybe just for those who aren't familiar with the process at the highest level, a materiality assessment typically includes conducting some research upfront about what's going on in your industry, what are your peers disclosing, what are some of the reporting frameworks asking organizations to report on, what are your investors asking of you, and trying to get a bit of a picture of the landscape relative to your organization. It's then the next step is typically to engage stakeholders, again, internal to the organization, but also external stakeholders, customers and clients, NGOs, investors, suppliers, and others to understand what their expectations are and understand what their perceptions are around the risks, the opportunities, and the impacts that your organization might face specific to these individual E, S, and G issues. And then taking that research, taking that direct feedback from stakeholders, and really trying to plot out what are those most material issues. And you'll see just a little illustrative example of a materiality matrix. It's a very common way to present those issues that rise in importance from an internal stakeholder perspective and impact on the business, as well as importance to external stakeholders here on the vertical axis. A materiality assessment can help you, again, just kind of weave through all the chaos that can sometimes be surrounding different E, S, and G topics, and just help you focus on what matters most. It's also a great mechanism for engaging your stakeholders. And that includes internally your own employees around sustainability. So a lot of kind of side benefits to doing a materiality assessment. I think the other benefit I'll touch on, and you'll hear me say a couple of times today, when you conduct a materiality assessment and the output of that really helps you understand what specific issues matter most to your business and to your stakeholders, it helps you tell your own story. So, gone are the days where an organization can stick its head in the sand and just say, this doesn't apply to us. No one's asking us questions. Let's let it blow over. Your story will be told whether you tell it or not. So going through materiality assessment, coming up with those most important issues, this is a key process to help you tell your own story in a way that meets your stakeholders' expectations. Once you've identified what those material issues or material topics are, it's really important to establish some governance around sustainability and around those topics specifically in your organization. What I've put on the slide here is just an example of what that type of governance might look like. Typically, there's governance at the board level, either in one of the existing committees like the NomGov committee, or some boards have a sustainability or ESG specific committee or subcommittee. As I said earlier, it's really important that the CEO is really driving the strategy and the action. And typically there would be an executive level sustainability council or steering committee to help inform actions on sustainability issues and to liaise with folks who are actually leading some of the day-to-day programs and other actions around sustainability. At the corporate level, many organizations have a sustainability function or a sustainability leader, but not all. Some organizations find it useful to have a bit of a working group that supports the executive level steering committee. But ultimately, it's really important to tie the issues that you determined to be material from your materiality assessment and to give accountability and ownership to material issue owners and support from subject matter experts to really drive action and accountability on those material issues. And then, of course, surrounding kind of the organizational governance, there will also be other items such as policies and charters, standards and procedures, data platforms, management systems, et cetera. Again, really important to ensure that sustainability isn't just kind of done by one person and that the efforts and the programs that are put in place have longevity for the organization. Okay, so with responsibility and accountability assigned for those issues, and you know which of these E, S, and G issues matter most, it's time to start planning the path forward. So a good first step, once you are armed with that, focus on the E, S, and G issues specific to your organization, is to really identify, first of all, the current state. So go back into the organization and understand, well, we might not have called this sustainability or ESG before, but what activities or programs or other mechanisms do we have in place that are already touching on some of these important material issues? Health and safety, for example, or talent attraction and retention. It's likely your company is already doing a lot. It might just not have the ESG stamp on it. So through those material issue owners, take the time to understand what's already in place, who's already involved in driving some of those actions, and what's our current level of performance? How are we doing in this area? Do we have any data available to provide a bit of a benchmark or a baseline for our own performance? And then once you have that understanding of your current state, define your ambition level. So not everyone has to be a leader of the pack. And at an organization, your ambition level can actually be different for different material issues. So for example, as an organization, based on your values and your operations and your stakeholders, you might choose to be a leader when it comes to issues around energy use, GHG emissions, managing climate risk, et cetera. But maybe when it comes to human rights or diversity, equity, inclusion, you want to be a solid performer, but maybe not the leader of the pack. So it's really important, again, on an issue by issue basis to start thinking about what that ambition level is. I should also note, things that might inform your ambition level include, these stakeholder expectations that you heard when you were doing your materiality assessment. Regulations might also influence your ambition. But again, it's really important that this is done in concert with and led by the material issue owners, so kind of the topic owners. This isn't about a VP of sustainability kind of declaring where the company is going. Really important to have leadership level support and buy-in as well. Okay, so you've got your material issues identified, you've got a governance structure set around them, you understand your current performance level in each of these issue areas, you have set a vision of what your ambitions are. Now it's time to set performance goals and establish key performance indicators to measure your progress. And I think this is a process that many of you are familiar with, even with more traditional, say, environmental metrics. But you know, as we've all learned, our goals should be SMART goals. So you know, they're specific, they're measurable, they're time bound, et cetera. And underpinning them with a KPI ensures that we have not just a goal, but we have a way to measure our performance towards goal. Now, I'm going to talk separately in a moment about climate related and GHG related goals. But here I've given an example of just a waste minimization goal and an underpinning KPI that you might see. For more mature organizations who've had their kind of program up and running, it's really best practice to tie individual compensation, in particular at an executive leadership level, to goal achievement. Okay, and if you can believe it, I won't say that all of that is easy, but this next step is kind of where the rubber hits the road and where the hard work starts. So it's easy to set a goal. I'm sure all of you, every time you, I don't know, does anyone open a newspaper anymore or look online? A new company is setting a net zero goal or a zero waste to landfill goal. Setting a goal is easy. The difficult part is actually achieving it. So with goals established, it's really time to develop action plans specific to each individual goal and sub-goal or target if you set them, in order to really drive that progress. Now, in some cases, your initial actions might actually be just to gather more information or better understand your current performance or develop a baseline, and that's okay. But eventually your actions really need to lead you to goal achievement. And then I think a step that some folks often get to maybe later in the process, but it's really important to think about up front, is as you're developing those action plans, be it for managing energy use or increasing diversity or establishing governance around cybersecurity and data privacy, it's really important to recognize that these actions in many cases will require an investment and additional resources, for example, to stand up a new program. So thinking about those from the get-go to make sure that rather than just coming up with a list of actions and no resources, you're coming up with a resource plan while developing your action plan. With those actions assigned and, you know, the vision, the North Star really being set by your goals and your targets, and you've got KPIs in place to measure progress. I come from a management systems background, so I'm a big fan of the plan, do, check, act cycle. So we just talked about the action plan. Actions are assigned, folks are out taking action. It is really important to monitor progress. And that's more than just monitoring action, like did this person write this policy? Check. It's really important to also check the effectiveness of the action. So is this policy statement actually driving the culture shift that we needed around, you know, the given topic area? So check is more than just checking actions. It's about checking effectiveness. And then in many cases, things will need to change. Maybe the actions aren't as effective as were once intended. You'll need to make adjustments. And of course, this isn't all happening in a vacuum. Many of your goals are going to be long-term goals. The world is changing drastically. So throughout this whole process, there's a bit of a loop that my very simplified journey doesn't do justice for. And that's stakeholder expectations are kind of always in a state of flux and always changing. So while you're monitoring and managing your performance, you should also be continually engaging with stakeholders, both communicating out your progress, but also proactively soliciting feedback from stakeholders, including external stakeholders. Are we meeting your expectations? Are your expectations changing? It's a bit hard to get our arms wrapped around because it's not as easy as, you know, this regulation or this permit says I have to do X, Y, Z, and once I do it, I'm done. So this bit around monitoring and managing performance and engaging your stakeholders as part of the process is really key. There's been some discussion today already about sustainability reporting, but as I said earlier, this is really the output. It's typically not the starting point. And I actually quickly during the break made some edits to the slide. So it's a bit crowded and wordy, but there were some questions asked on an earlier session about can you just provide kind of the logos and the links to some of these reporting frameworks that we're hearing so much about. So let me just start by saying, again, telling your own story, proactively disclosing, whether that's via your annual sustainability report, an integrated report, but taking that proactive measure to disclose your sustainability strategy, your commitments, your performance, really goes a long way to help you tell your own story around sustainability. And as was mentioned earlier, there are lots of disclosure frameworks that are available to guide folks. I'll make sure that these links are available as a resource on the Montrose exhibitor webpage as well. But Global Reporting Initiative and the SASB standards both cover kind of E, S, and G. GRI is a comprehensive framework that, using the concept of materiality, you determine which indicators are most relevant and material for you to report on. The SASB standards are, as mentioned before, industry specific and really are meant to represent the investor point of view and key data points to allow investors to understand sustainability performance of an organization. The ISSB just released the IFRS S1 and S2 standards around sustainability, kind of general requirements and disclosures, and then climate-related disclosures, which is S2, providing kind of a comprehensive framework that is expected to really take hold globally. And then, as we've already had a robust discussion on in an earlier session, the EU's CSRD is really likely to have a major impact on sustainability disclosures. So really important for organizations, even those based in the US, to get their arms around whether or not CSRD might be applicable to them, and if so, what actions to take. And again, happy to answer any questions here or offline about that. When we talk about disclosure, just one other quick note, there are also other disclosure mechanisms, such as questionnaires you might fill out for CDP, or maybe some of you are participating in EcoVadis. So disclosing performance comes in many shapes and formats, and often becomes, for better or for worse, the tail wagging the dog. And again, this is all a bit of a do loop, but I'll just end where I started, which is, I don't know if Dave is listening, but he made a comment today and then quickly said, oh, I think I just threw up in my mouth. And that's how I feel when I say sustainability is a journey. It sounds very cheesy, I know, but it's so true. It really is a journey. It's not a tick box exercise. It's not a one and done exercise. It will take time. It will take investment. And at the early stages of that journey, you're likely to be more focused on short-term risks or things that are maybe linked more to compliance issues. But as you mature, you can really start to integrate some of these actions and programs and processes into the organization, through the organization strategy, through those operational processes and workflows and its culture, to really embed sustainability into the organization. And, you know, for some of those companies, especially some of those purpose-driven companies that Dave mentioned earlier today, sustainability really can be a differentiation for an organization in the market. It can be a source of innovation. It can be a driver for growth. So although many of us may feel weighted down around all these different requirements and reporting frameworks, there really is an opportunity there. Okay, I will just touch, maybe I'll spend another 5 or 10 minutes. We've talked so far about sustainability broadly and kind of the E, S, and G ingredients of sustainability and the journey that an organization can take to really integrate sustainability into its business. But we all know there's a lot of focus being paid these days to greenhouse gas emissions, energy use, and climate change. So again, this might be and is very likely to be material issues for your organization. So let me just touch briefly and kind of deep dive down into these sets of material issues around GHG emissions and climate change. I think what's really important to note, and what some people don't always kind of understand the nuances around, is that when we talk about climate change and GHG emissions, there's really two lenses that we need to look at. The one that I think most of us are really comfortable talking about is impact. And so companies and individuals, we can impact the environment through our activities that may emit greenhouse gas emissions. So driving a non-electric car, or the electricity that's used to power my office. These activities impact the environment through greenhouse gas emissions. And so it's really important for organizations to first kind of understand their impact by undertaking greenhouse gas inventory. Typically, we're using the methodology from the GHG protocol. Again, these are some of my ads to make sure folks have the resources they need to move forward here. And then once you have a good understanding of your impact, the inventory, setting goals and targets to minimize that impact. And nowadays, it's really best practice to make sure that those targets are science-based, aligned with a 1.5 degree scenario. And the Science-Based Target Initiatives as an organization, not required for anyone to use, but provides a really good framework and methodology for science-based target setting. So I would recommend that folks check that out if you haven't set your own targets yet. But there's another side of the equation, and that's climate risk. So the world is changing, and climate change really presents risks and opportunities for individual organizations. So those can be risks that are really tangible, like physical risks from flooding or wildfires, either to your operations or maybe to your supply chain. But there's also risk based on transition. So if there are increasing regulations to limit global warming, if there is a price of carbon, increasing demands of your customers, those are risks to your business that need to be identified and managed. Those are transitional risks, and all of those risks are likely to have a financial impact. So many of you have probably heard of the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, the TCFD. Really is the framework for managing risk, and the draft SEC climate rule uses TCFD, well, not by name, but it's really the framework that's used underpinning the draft SEC climate rule. I won't spend a lot of time on these slides. Again, they'll be available as resources. I think it was mentioned earlier, scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. As I think Mark mentioned in the earlier session, scope 1 and 2 emissions are those emissions from your own operations, whereas scope 3 emissions are emissions from your value chain. If you've been kind of paying attention to some of the discussions around the draft SEC climate rule, for example, there's a lot of discussion around scope 3 emissions. And again, probably another subject for its own webinar, but scope 3 emissions, I left a list here of the different categories of scope 3 emissions. For many organizations, scope 3 emissions can be anywhere between 3 to 20 times as much as scope 1 and 2 emissions, depending on your business. So there really is value in understanding kind of those hot spots of emissions in your value chain. The key takeaway here is that the methodology is different, and these emissions aren't quite as measurable in many cases as your scope 1 and 2 emissions, but it's not about perfection. It's not about putting together the pieces of the puzzle to get everyone's emissions in one picture. It's really about scale and using the results of a scope 3 inventory to drive decision making on where you as an organization can make interventions. Again, I added some content here. I'll put it in the as one of the attachments on the Montrose page, but that process that I talked through for sustainability and ESG broadly, that process really applies here. I've kind of spelled it out from a GHG impact perspective. So conducting an inventory, setting goals and targets, developing action plans to meet those targets. That might include things like marginal abatement cost curves to understand emissions reductions versus cost, monitoring performance, what emissions reductions are happening, and then disclosing performance to stakeholders, both your actual emissions and the progress you're making towards your goals and targets. A lot of people will disclose their performance as part of their sustainability report. Other organizations have chosen to have maybe a climate resilience report or a TCFD report, but it's really important to note that TCFD is not just a reporting mechanism, it's really a set of recommendations and a process. So that was impact. Again, TCFD is really the mechanism on the risk side. So if you, as your company has understood its impact on a GHG inventory, set goals, it's also really important to understand the risks to your business because of climate change. So this snapshot is taken right from TCFD and talks a little bit about the different types of risks and opportunities that climate change is driving across the globe. And then TCFD has a framework with specific elements that sit under these 4 elements on how to disclose these risks and the strategy that you're employing to manage these risks and the governance that you have in place around those risks. So again, TCFD is a disclosure mechanism, but there's really a lot of work that needs to be done to make sure you can disclose. And then I'm just going to skip ahead to the last slide. I think a lot of folks might say, great, understand it, I buy in, but where do I start? There are so many great resources available to folks publicly that you can leverage to figure out where to start around, again, getting that buy-in and leadership, really identifying what those transition and physical risks are, conducting scenario analysis, integrating climate risk into your enterprise risk management program. So again, I'll make sure that these slides are posted so that you have some resources available to you to learn a little bit more here. So I'm going to just leave up some closing thoughts on a slide here, and maybe Jessica, we can open it up to questions while we leave this up for the audience to ponder.
I think that's a great idea. And someone just asked in the chat where this slide deck will be available, and you're going to have it in the Montrose booth, correct?
I will. It's not there yet. So if it's not there later today, definitely by tomorrow morning.
Fantastic. Thank you. And I'm trying to even think where to begin with the conversation. We've had quite a few questions come in. Okay. I think we're going to start with stakeholder buy-in and materiality assessments. Excuse me there. So having that initial conversation with your internal stakeholders, how do you go about even approaching them? Yeah. When you haven't done a materiality assessment yet, when their track record has shown maybe they have not been on board with more, with these initiatives that you want to start. So what does that initial conversation really look like?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you're finding yourself in a situation where, you haven't done a materiality assessment, you don't really have the buy-in for that yet, but that's where you want to start. It is really important, as I said before, to kind of make the business case to your executive leadership and likely to your board of directors. What I would suggest is taking a look at what's happening with peers and competitors. That's often a good kind of canary in the coal mine for kind of what issues are kind of maybe hiding in the shadows. And Dave talked a little bit this morning about, some of issues that companies have faced. So definitely taking a look at your peers, engaging maybe with some close stakeholders that you can, use their input to inform a discussion with the CEO, for example, also very useful. Talking to your, if you have an investor relations group, talking to them to understand what sort of inquiries your organization might be getting around ESG issues from the investor perspective. That can really help to build a business case. Also, what kind of customer or client questionnaires you might be getting. So it takes a little bit of legwork, and it's different for every organization as to what those drivers might be. But I think with a little bit of doing a little bit of homework and finding kind of where those kind of ESG issues are for your organization that really have the potential to impact business. It's not about necessarily being green or kind of having volunteers out in the community. It's really about the intersection of environmental and social risks and impacts in your business. And I think if you can find where that intersection is, you'll get the ear of your CEO, your executive leadership team, and your board.
I couldn't agree more with that statement. And you mentioned so many different stakeholders, both internal and external. So how many stakeholders? I know that's not an easy question to ask, and it's going to be dependent on the organization. It's going to be dependent on the size, whether it's public, whether it's private. There's so many different variables that are going to play into this, but.
Well, I know you all know my answer, which is there is no magic number. Listen, we have to operate within business realities. And I think we've heard, sentiments before, taking a bite of the elephant or eating the elephant one bite at a time. And, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. I think, the right number is really the amount of input that you need to get a good view of what is important to stakeholders and what the business risks, opportunities, and impacts are. So some organizations that we work with, they might do an all employee survey and get input from every single employee and underpin that with 20 interviews with different executive and senior leaders in the organization. And we might then also go out and interview directly investors, customers, board members, suppliers, and that process in and of itself will take months. Other clients, they don't have those resources, and it doesn't mean you shouldn't do a materiality assessment. You just need to scale it so that you can start with something. So a scaled down version might be 3 or 4 interviews with executive leadership, or a survey just to the senior leadership team. It might be using proxies for external stakeholders. So for example, the SASB standards, because they're meant to represent the investor view, some organizations might start with those to represent the external stakeholder group of investors. So if I had to throw out a number, I'd say, maybe 5 to 10 internal and 5 to 10 external would be a good starting point. But again, I would never want to discourage anyone from undertaking a materiality assessment if they felt like they had limited resources and couldn't engage that many.
Which is very important to know. And I know one of the things that was mentioned and talked about in the earlier conversations today was doing a materiality assessment and how important it is in order for you to really look at your data, have it analyzed, and
I think I've lost audio.
Can you hear me, Jami?
Now I can, yes.
Okay. Not sure what's going on with that, but I'm glad you could hear me again. When it comes to doing a materiality assessment, how detailed does one really need to be? How many different parameters need to be set up in your materiality assessment in order for it to be, I don't want to use the word valid, but valuable?
Yeah, I think, gosh, that's a great question. And again, I'm going to go back to don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. And,
Starting small is still better.
Yes, exactly. Don't let a lack of resources stop you from doing anything. So, GRI, looking at the individual GRI indicators is can be a great place to start as far as what are the, what's that universe look like? But I think it is really important to look at kind of the E, the S from an external perspective around society and communities, but also from an internal perspective, diversity, equity, inclusion, health and safety, and then those governance mechanisms. Now, again, we really pride ourselves on meeting our clients where they are. So, if a company is feeling like it's getting a lot of pressure from investors around environmental issues and it really wants to start focus there, there's nothing to say you can't start with a materiality assessment just around environmental issues. But, I think it's just really important to start with the end in mind. What are you trying to achieve, and then kind of scope out the assessment, kind of in alignment with those objectives.
Now, I mean, it definitely makes sense to me the way that you've laid it out there. And there are so many unknowns, and there's no perfect answer. There's no perfect solution for all companies. It'd be great if there was one set of standards that in a perfect world companies could reference, but we know that that's not reality. I do want to try in the last few minutes to talk a little bit about advisory firms and ratings firms, because that was a question that did come in. So where do those firms, where do they fit into the equation? Because it's a big part of what you're seeing in today's world, especially, with publications. They're referencing various firms that I'm sure we are all in the space aware of. They're, actively rating and scoring companies. So where in this journey is it getting addressed?
Yeah, great question. So what Jessica's referring to are either like proxy advisory firms like ISS, for example, or there are kind of ESG ratings agencies like MSCI has an ESG rating scheme, or Sustainalytics. And, a lot of companies find themselves kind of chasing the score, right, to raise their ISS ENS scores, or their MSCI scores. Really, those considerations and the expectations of these proxy advisory firms and these rating agencies, those can really be considered kind of stakeholders who are, kind of part of the table. So when you're doing your materiality assessment and you're mapping out stakeholder expectations through interviews and surveys, you can also kind of weave in expectations from these raters and rankers as part of the input to that process. So then once you have all that input, you're kind of marrying up what you heard in interviews, what you gathered through surveys, and what you're seeing in some of these rater and ranking schemes, in particular, the ones that matter to your organization, and synthesize all of that together to look at then what material issues or material topics kind of rise to the top.
And I just have one follow-up question to that.
Sure.
Is there a resource that tells companies what ratings they should follow? What ratings system is going to be best for their organization?
The best way to find that out is to talk to your investors, or at least start with your investor relations lead. I mean, those rating and ranging, the ratings mean nothing if no one's looking at them. So they're mostly used by investors to make decisions on investments. So in different organizations, the executive leadership team, the board of directors, they are likely getting input from either current investors or prospective investors about what's important to them. So again, another theme. There's no one size fits all, but do some digging internally, talk to your investor relations group. If you have direct access to investors, ask them. It's really important not to chase all of them, but to kind of understand which ones are important to your stakeholders and largely to your current and prospective investors, and then use those as the kind of primary frameworks.
Well, I think this was a perfect way to end your session for the day. It's been a great time working with Montrose and with your entire team, Jami. It's been a wonderful conversation. I'm sure this is a conversation that we could continue for hours and hours and hours. But again, feel free to visit Jami. The exhibit hall does close again until tomorrow morning. So jump on at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. The exhibit hall will open again, so you will have access to all of the resources to download. And if you have any questions at any time, please feel free to email the event team or send us a chat. Jami just graciously put her email address in the chat for everyone there. So again, Jami, thank you. We appreciate Montrose being a sponsor for the event and closing out our day one.
It's been a real pleasure. Thanks.